12-year-old Polly Klaas was in her own bedroom having a slumber party with two girlfriends when she was abducted last night.
He had a knife, he threatened them, and then he left with the victim.
Police are calling Richard Allen Davis the prime suspect in the Polly Klaas kidnap case.
Davis's life of crime began at the age of 12.
Why was this guy on the street? Why wasn't this guy in prison?
Polly's murder is pushing the 3 strikes and you're out initiative forward. It would eliminate parole for repeat offenders.
3 strikes and you are out.
In the 90s, we thought the only solution was lock them up and throw away the key. 3 strikes law disproportionately impacted people of color, poor people.
These 3 strike guys that are here, they were seeing guys with murder have less time than they did for stealing a slice of bread.
They all want to empty the prisons now, and what's happening? Crime is on the rise.
All these misdemeanors have gone nowhere. People aren't getting prosecuted for them. There are no consequences.
I don't think there should be attempts to rehabilitate them. I think we should throw them away and lock up the key. I think violent people should be behind bars.
You can just say, let's just lock them up. But it doesn't work. So then what?
Broke into our house and they took my daughter.
It was a crime that sent shockwaves across the nation. A girl abducted from her home and then killed. The murder of Polly Klaas in 1993 caused public outrage. Crime, it seemed, was rampant.
2 couples were confronted by a 17-year-old purse snatcher. A 64-year-old man was shot in the head and died.
It's just really scary if you don't feel safe anywhere.
Americans felt unsafe. In the turbulent 60s, television showed protests, rebellions, and urban riots. Violent crime was also on the rise.
My fellow Americans.
In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on crime.
On the ground, on the ground.
But crime continued to climb into the 1980s, fueled by the crack cocaine epidemic.
This is crack cocaine, and it's turning our cities into battle zones.
High-profile killers created even more fear. In the San Francisco Bay Area, a string of unsolved child kidnappings destroyed a feeling of safety in suburban communities. By 1992, crime was dropping, yet tough-on-crime policies were a hot topic in the presidential race that year.
The Bush administration promised to wage a war on drugs and get tough on crime.
By 1995, we will have tripled federal prison capacity.
Opponents of the war on crime and mass incarceration pushed back.
We get tough on crime, we put more people in jail, we get more police officers, we're going to have a safer society. That hasn't worked out in the last 12 years.
1992 proved pivotal for the tough on crime movement for another reason. 18-year-old Kimber Reynolds was shot and killed during a robbery in Fresno. The men responsible had been in trouble with the law before. Kimber's father, Michael Reynolds, made it his life's mission to keep repeat offenders behind bars. He proposed a law that would double the sentence of criminals who committed a second violent felony. A third felony meant 25 years to life in prison. It was called 3 strikes and you're out.
Any use of a gun in an armed robbery or assault, automatic 25 years to life. They're out of here.
In 1993, Michael Reynolds' bill was introduced in the California legislature, but it did not pass. Then, in October, Polly Klaas was kidnapped out of her bedroom during a slumber party. The crime was chilling. A stranger breaking into a house and stealing a child. One of Polly's friends described the scary encounter.
Okay, we were up in her room and we were talking. Suddenly this guy came in. He had a big knife behind her. Said, "Nobody move us." And he told us to be quiet and we don't say so. And now that Polly was over here, the screen door being shut.
The stranger tied up and gagged the two friends and took Polly.
The ultimate nightmare, to have a child plucked out of a house full of people like that. I mean, what in the hell's wrong with our society when something like this can happen?
The town hopes and prays for the safe return of 12-year-old Polly Klaas.
Polly's kidnapping got national attention. Polly's father, Mark Klaas, remembers holding out hope through weeks of fruitless searches.
When Polly was kidnapped, she was just the latest in a string of children that had been kidnapped in the Bay Area in the previous decade. And the hard, sad truth is that none of those cases had been solved. So for those first 2 months where we didn't know where she was, I was completely dominated by fear, anger, and at the same time, ironically, hope.
Then, 2 months later, a break in the case. Police detained a possible suspect.
Police are calling Richard Allen Davis, the prime suspect in the Polly Klaas kidnap case.
Polly's parents were called in to meet with police.
They ran down some of his criminal history to us. They said, he's the guy that took her. We know this for a fact, and you have to get used to the idea that Polly is dead. And I went ballistic on them. And I told them that I needed proof that Polly was dead.
Richard Allen Davis was not helping. For days, he denied kidnapping Polly.
Know nothing about it. I don't know. Kidnapped that little wrong. Now you're real. You talked about rape and things like that. We didn't mention anything about that. We mentioned kidnapping to Polly Klaas. Nobody said anything about sexual assault of the little girl. I just told you I didn't snatch the little girl.
Finally, on the fourth day, Davis confessed and told investigators where to find Polly's remains. Davis confessed he strangled Polly when he was putting her in the car. From the moment Davis was arrested, attention quickly focused on his criminal record.
Court records show Richard Allen Davis's life of crime began at the age of 12 with petty thefts and drug dealing.
39-year-old Richard Allen Davis is a career criminal with 2 kidnapping convictions.
In 1975, he was sentenced to 6 years for burglary. He served 1 year. 2 years later, he was back behind bars for kidnapping, receiving stolen property, and assault with a deadly weapon. He could have been sentenced to serve 35 years, but he was paroled after 4 years, 9 months. And in 1985, he was sentenced to 19 years for kidnapping, robbery, attempted robbery, burglary, and assault. But he was paroled this past June after 7 years, 4 months.
The kidnapping in 1985 happened in Redwood City. The prosecutor in the case said at the time, the defendant has engaged in a pattern of violent conduct which indicates a serious danger to society.
Why was this guy on the street? Why wasn't this guy in prison if he had such an extensive criminal history that went back decades and had been sentenced to over 200 years in prison during the course of that criminal history? Why in the world was he out on the street? He was diagnosed as a sexually sadistic psychopath back in 1978. They knew exactly who he was and what he was. They knew that he didn't operate like other human beings. They knew that he had no conscience. They knew that he targeted women and in cruel and sexual ways. They knew all that, but they let him out anyway.
Davis became a symbol for what some viewed as a flawed criminal justice system that treated prisons like a revolving door for offenders.
People that paroled Richard Allen Davis are basically responsible for what happened to Polly.
Some wondered if Davis was responsible for other missing Bay Area children. Police left it very clear why he would not have been able to commit those crimes.
He's not a suspect in any kidnapping that occurred from August of '85 until June of '93, because he was incarcerated.
The arrest of Richard Allen Davis revived the debate over the 3 strikes bill. People wanted something done.
Can you move for just a moment? Thank you.
Phones at the 3 Strikes You're Out headquarters in Fresno have been ringing off the hook since word got out that the suspect in Polly Klaas's kidnapping was a convicted felon.
People they're angry. They're angry, they're upset. Women are calling from that northern area, so they don't feel safe in their own homes. They have small children.
You have to ask yourself is how many more people are walking around out there in the same setting that he is, with many prior felony convictions of a violent nature.
Tears of grief mixed with tears of rage at a criminal justice system no one thinks is working.
For those of us in public life, she makes us all the more determined to tighten our laws, to keep repeat offenders behind bars, and to put more police on our streets.
Polly's murder is pushing the 3 Strikes and You're Out initiative forward. It would eliminate parole for repeat offenders. So-called good time is also under attack. That's credit for time served. Davis was only halfway through his last kidnap sentence when he was released.
Now 50% of the sentence is served. And then if they do a good job folding shirts in the prison laundry, no matter how dangerous, they're out. That's crazy.
He had been a kidnapper in previous...
Polly's father, Mark Klaas, joined the push for a 3 strikes law. He was invited to the White House as President Bill Clinton pushed Congress for a tough crime bill.
There are these evil men lurking in the night that are stealing our children off of the streets, out of the parking lots, out of the parks, and out of our homes now. When you allow these kinds of things to happen, we're very much endangering the next generation of people. There was great outrage over the criminal justice system in our country. And in fact, during my first meeting with President Clinton, I convinced him to add a 3 strikes component to that crime bill.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
A month later, President Bill Clinton mentioned Polly Klaas during his 1994 State of the Union speech.
Every day, the national peace is shattered by crime. In Petaluma, California, an innocent slumber party gives way to agonizing tragedy for the family of Polly Klaas.
Momentum kept building for tough-on-crime policies. President Clinton asked Congress to approve the biggest crime bill in U.S. history.
Now, those who commit crimes should be punished, and those who commit repeated violent crimes should be told, when you commit a 3rd violent crime, you will be put away and put away for good. 3 strikes and you are out.
The crime bill authorized nearly $10 billion for new prisons and funded 100,000 new police officers. It encouraged more punitive laws and longer prison sentences.
Getting killed by the equivalent of a Uzi submachine gun.
Then Senator Joe Biden was one of the main sponsors.
We've begun the effort to take back our streets and to make our schools and neighborhoods a little bit safer.
Later that year, Congress passed the crime bill. Mark Klaas was standing next to President Bill Clinton when he signed the crime bill into law. In 1994, tough-on-crime laws were sweeping through state legislatures across the country. California was no different.
This bill doubles the penalties for the second offense, triples the penalties for the third.
Ayes 59 on the bill, noes 10.
Lawmakers are feeling the pressure this election year, so no one is too surprised that 5 bills sailed through the Assembly today.
I got enough hell for not supporting this bill the first time.
We are doing something to respond to the public's concern. We are doing something to take violent, repeat criminals off the streets and put them behind bars where they belong.
The 3 strikes law that was rejected a year earlier by the state legislature passed easily this time. Governor Pete Wilson signed it into law at the Los Angeles Police Department.
It sends a clear message, a clear warning to repeat criminals. You'd better find a new line of work because we're going to start turning career criminals into career inmates.
Voters approved a similar measure that November. Within a year, 24 states had some form of a 3 strikes law. But critics said the law was too broad, especially because a third crime didn't have to be violent for a life sentence. 2 years after it was approved, 192 people were serving time under 3 strikes for marijuana possession. Just 40 for murder, 25 for rape, and 24 for kidnapping.
I think it's absurd. I think it was a classic bait-and-switch scheme. You had politicians like Pete Wilson who got the voters to go to the polls and vote for 3 strikes and you're out on the symbol of Richard Allen Davis. And now we're in the store, and what we find in the store is a bunch of pizza thieves.
One of those pizza thieves was Jerry Williams. He had 5 felony convictions when he stole pizza from some kids. His sentence? 25 years to life. The victim of that pizza theft spoke at an event celebrating the 2nd anniversary of the 3 strikes law.
As a victim of it, it's kind of like weird because it's kind of small, but it doesn't matter what the crime is. A crime's a crime.
Sure, the net went too wide. I mean, listen, small-time drug people shouldn't be hassled. I mean, how many people were spending decades in California prisons because of weed? And there was definitely some racial issues to deal with. I know that the criminal justice system isn't fair for everyone, but the one that we had between 1993 and 2003 kept more people safe in this country.
Crime in California did drop after the passage of the 3 strikes law. But it also dropped in states without a 3 strikes law. It was part of a trend that saw nationwide crime drop by half between 1991 and 2014. But the impact in prisons was undeniable. 10 years later, California had nearly 43,000 inmates serving time for a 3rd strike, about 1/4 of the total prison population. More than half of 2nd and 3rd strikers were convicted for a non-violent offense, like drug use or petty theft.
In the 90s, we thought the only solution was lock them up and throw away the key. When we began to look at the data on who the 3 strikes law was really targeting, and it disproportionately impacted people of color, poor people, people with mental illness, people who had been sentenced to life in prison for really extraordinarily minor crimes. It was the equivalent of life without parole, or in some ways the death penalty. You weren't being released from prison except in a coffin.
Hi. For the 3 strikes law, we wanted to get it amended so it applies to violent crimes only.
In 2004, there was an attempt to modify the 3 strikes law. Proposition 66 was on the ballot. It would require the 3rd offense to be a serious or violent crime. Polly Klaas's grandfather appeared in television ads to support the change.
We're putting people away for life when their 3rd strike is a non-violent crime, like stealing aspirin.
Proposition 66 was popular.
That's a good idea. Thank you so much.
Opinion polls showed it was favored by 2/3 of voters. It looked like it would be overwhelmingly approved. But days before the election, then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger came out with ads against softening the 3rd strike.
Child molesters, rapists, murderers, keep them off the streets and out of your neighborhood. Vote no on 66.
The fear ads worked. Proposition 66 failed, but it set the stage for criminal justice reform, as jails and prisons became overcrowded with people doing long sentences for minor crimes.
I stole a computer out of Best Buy. They gave me 25 to life and sent me off to prison.
Michael Evans' third strike was for stealing 4 bottles of shampoo. Mark Payne is doing life for stealing videos. And Kevin O'Farrell's third strike was for possessing $20 worth of rock cocaine, landing him in this overcrowded prison.
You got bunks on the day room floors that they shouldn't be in there. They just put them in here because they ain't got no space. They locking everybody up for nothing.
The 3 strikes law took away the majority of my life.
Sahad Shakur is the owner of Falafel Corner, a chain of Mediterranean restaurants with more than 30 locations across the state.
People eat my food. I'm serving up smiles every day, man.
He's also a former 3 strikes prisoner.
I was really small when I came from Pakistan. We were living in a Mexican neighborhood. We got picked on for our race. We got picked on for our food that we ate. It was a source of trauma for us. I started gravitating towards guys that people were afraid of, and eventually supplanted my Pakistani identity with this Mexican Cholo identity. Was in a gang, we get in trouble, some robberies, gun possessions, and I ended up in prison. Did 6 years, got out, and was involved in a big fight. Got 25 to life for that one, as a 3 striker. And really just no prospects of ever getting out.
When Sahad Shakur was in prison, he was able to separate himself from Latino prison gangs and began attending Muslim services. He also started to educate himself. He got his high school diploma, then a bachelor's degree, and he began work on a master's. As his mind opened up, he started to see things differently.
With that knowledge, I was able to figure out that, hey, there's something going on here in San Quentin. These 3 strike guys that are here, they were seeing guys with murder have less time than they did for stealing a slice of bread. And their brains couldn't reconcile that. And they were just messed up psychologically.
The idea of this class is start with an introduction with the 3 strikes law, in part because it's a place that we found such incredible injustice.
About the same time, Stanford professor Michael Romano got his law students to represent people serving life sentences after committing minor crimes.
My client is Jeffrey. He's 60 years old. He's serving 34 to life.
And I saw cases that came across our desk of a person who's got sentenced to life for aiding the sale of $5 worth of crack cocaine to an undercover police officer, or who got sentenced to life for forging a DMV exam. It wasn't just one case or dozen cases, it was hundreds of thousands of cases of people who've been sentenced to life for these extraordinarily minor crimes.
Back in San Quentin State Prison, Shakur kept insisting on getting help for 3 strikes inmates.
And I actually wrote the letter to the psychology department in San Quentin saying, here's the symptoms that I see in all these guys that are 3 strikers. It was a psychosis. So eventually they sent a psych tech to work with us to create a group for the 3 strikers. It was called Hope for Strikers.
Shakur helped run the Hope for Strikers group for 3 years when Stanford professor Michael Romano heard about them. He and other proponents of criminal justice reform went to visit the prisoners at San Quentin to hear their stories.
I got 27 years to life for possession of cocaine.
Shakur had already served 16 years in prison when he met Romano during that visit.
My 3rd strike was instigating a fight. It was a nonviolent, non-serious felony, and they gave me 25 to life. We have not given up.
Going and seeing these people in person really sort of drove home the inhumanity of the three strikes law. The people who were sort of rotting behind bars and growing old did not need to be there, and they were serving no interest in public safety. So there was an idea that really started here at Stanford to change the whole law. And that's how Prop 36 got started.
By 2012, 27 states had adopted some form of a three strikes law. But California was the only state to impose life sentences for a nonviolent third strike. Proposition 36 would allow prisoners serving life sentences for nonviolent crimes to petition a court for release.
Mike and I wrote the bill so as to make it as attractive as possible. And one of the main attractions was to make certain that none of the crimes to which the defendant had been sentenced was violent. Not rape, not murder.
Proposition 36 gave three strikers hope.
If the life sentence gets taken off, then chances are that I may end up going home.
On November 6, 2012, Proposition 36 was put before voters.
We wrote the bill to undo the most extreme portions of the three strikes law, which is somebody steals a pizza, somebody steals a loaf of bread. All those things were potentially a third strike, resulting in life in prison.
Proposition 36 won. It got 69% of the vote.
Usually when people go to the polls, they're voting to increase penalties. And this is one of the few times actually in U.S. history where they've said, no, it's too harsh.
It was the first statutory change in this state that was real criminal justice reform. And it was the beginning of changing laws in other states and moving away from harsh sentencing.
The premise of all of the arguments against three strikes were that it's ensnaring pizza thieves, and that they were spending 25 to life in prison, and that it was overcrowding California's prisons, and that we had to do something about that. What they never mentioned was the miserable criminal history behind even the pizza thief. These guys were guys that had assaults and rapes and all kinds of things in their past.
Jerry Williams, the man who stole pizza from children in 1994, had prior convictions for robbery. Normally, stealing a pizza is considered petty theft, but because of his prior crimes, Williams was sentenced to 25 years to life under the three strikes law. A judge later reduced his sentence and Williams was freed in 1999. He has not committed a serious crime since then.
You don't get out automatically under Proposition 36. You have to go to court and prove that you're no longer a risk to public safety.
I got out within months of Proposition 36 passing. I moved to the Bay Area and finished my education. And at the time, I couldn't afford the Bay Area rent, so I slept in my car for about 3 years.
I remember being very, uncomfortable, nervous about him living in his car. And he's like, oh no, it's great, I'm used to it. I'm used to, after living in a prison cell for 20 years, living in my car by myself is relative luxury.
Fries are ready for the Philly fries?
I was working at the original Falafel Corner restaurant. Saved up my money, and eventually this opportunity for Falafel Corner to open up in Sacramento comes along. And I jumped on that opportunity.
Shakur had big dreams. He turned his restaurant into a franchise. Now Falafel Corner has 30 locations across the state.
Have you had it with the sauteed onions before? Yeah.
More than 3,400 people have been freed from life sentences under Proposition 36.
We did it!
That's almost one person per day for a decade.
Oh, congratulations.
Barely 1% of those released have committed another crime.
We haven't heard of one case of anybody being seriously hurt or injured or victimized as a result of Proposition 36. I think it goes to show that the people who were targeted by Proposition 36, they weren't really violent people to begin with. They were people who were homeless and drug addicted and mentally ill, and they were breaking into cars and doing drugs and shoplifting. They weren't raping and killing and murdering people. Why do we care about recidivism? I mean, it's sort of the driving metric of so much of what we do, yet I don't think we have a firm grasp on what the hell it means.
Romano continues to lead a class at Stanford Law every year that investigates cases of people serving life sentences who present little risk of committing new crimes if they are released.
Since criminal justice reforms have started in 2011-12, crimes stayed the same or trended slightly downward over that period of time. For the most part, almost everybody who was eligible for release under Proposition 36 has gotten out. But there are a lot of people who are still serving life sentences for crimes like purse snatching or breaking into a garage, and people are still serving life sentences for those crimes.
My client is 60 years old. He's serving 34 to life. His mother was a drug dealer.
My client has serious mental illness. He also has a very serious history of childhood abuse.
So much of the cases that we're making in court, the circumstances of their life, which they had very little or to no control over, sort of contributed to or led to the situation that they are in.
So my client was sentenced to 27 years to life for possession of less than half a gram of meth.
As we go around the room, all of our clients, life sentences. Well, I think we sort of have to also remember that second-degree murder, there's 15 to life typically in California. So all of our clients are getting sentenced to a lot more than even murderers and rapists.
There's a backlash right now of folks wanting to return a bit to more harsh sentencing without any support that their reform is going to make a difference.
They all want to empty the prisons now, and what's happening? What's going on now in our society? Crime is on the rise.
The number of violent home invasion robberies in Oakland continues to rise.
Do you realize you're in front of a federal building and you're doing drugs? They don't care, you say.
That all harkens back to the last decade's worth of criminal justice reform. Our prisons aren't overcrowded, but our streets sure are. And people are being victimized in ways they hadn't been victimized in since the 1990s.
Some blame Proposition 47 for the increase in crime. Prop 47 was approved by voters in 2014, 2 years after the 3 strikes and you're out reform. It made simple drug possession a misdemeanor. But it also made some nonviolent property crimes misdemeanors as well. That is, if they don't exceed $950 in value.
So if you look at our power tools here, you'll see they all have electronic tethers on them. This is an alarm system.
Troy Welch owns several hardware stores. He says thefts are frequent.
To get above $950, it takes a lot. In a hardware store, we don't have that many items that are that much. You could have arms full of stuff and walk out and still be well under $900.
Proposition 47 essentially enabled them to do petty thefts anywhere with no consequences.
People who are stealing goods and services up to $950, you get a citation, which is a misdemeanor, right? You sign it, you get released at the scene. All these misdemeanors have gone nowhere. People aren't getting prosecuted for them. There are no consequences.
The idea that Proposition 47 inspired or kicked off some crime wave in California just does not match with the data. Proposition 47 is very limited to petty theft and drug possession. It has nothing to do with breaking into your home or your garage or your car or drug dealing or these massive smash and grabs. None of these crimes are covered by Proposition 47.
A study done in 2018 found no evidence Proposition 47 led to an increase in violent crime. But it may have contributed to a slight increase in property theft.
crime has gone up. Our business communities are suffering from the amount of crime that goes on. People can feel frustrated that the system isn't going to do anything. I don't think that is necessarily linked to Prop 47 at all, actually.
Organized theft rings may also be driving those mass thefts in stores that have been caught on camera. So has fentanyl. The rise of this cheap, addictive drug may be driving crime the way crack cocaine addiction was blamed for a rise in crime in the 1980s.
So how are you funding your drug habit, right? A young man they did an interview with, he just said, yeah, I went in and I stole from the store and I'm out here selling it because I need to feed my addiction.
For the most part, the people who are committing low-level crimes are people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are suffering from mental illness, and people from drug addiction. That's why it's an especially difficult problem, because it's not just a criminal justice problem, it's also a mental health care problem, it's also a homelessness problem.
There's no question that if somebody gets away with a crime, a low-level crime, then they could be more emboldened to do something more dramatic, like snatching someone's purse, get away with it, find money in a phone. Now you're going to snatch a purse off of someone's arm because you got away with it the first time. And frankly, I mean, people are getting away with those types of crimes.
California's $950 threshold to charge a theft as a felony is among the harshest in the country. 40 other states have laws that are more lenient. Texas is the most lenient. Its threshold is $2,500.
There's a lot of hysteria right now. People don't feel safe on the street. That's a terrible problem. But I also don't think the solution lies in harsh imprisonment, because it doesn't work.
Surveillance cameras capture a group of masked thieves. They smashed a car into a camera store and then raided it.
A lot of the problems we have today are not driven by sociopaths. Poverty is such a problem. I can understand why hopelessness can lead to theft. We have to figure out ways to support the people who did live that kind of life and help them recalibrate their thinking so they don't continue to act in that manner. That's not easy.
Study after study shows that stiffer and stiffer punishments actually don't decrease crime, don't interfere crime. In fact, they are criminogenic, meaning you send somebody to prison, you start to really interfere with their lives. It makes it harder to find a job, makes it harder to have housing. You lose connection with your family. And actually, the more times you go to prison, the more likely that you are to commit a new crime. Longer punishments, harsher punishments, they're actually not decreasing crime. Ironically, they can increase crime.
So at this store here, we get this recurring crime. It's usually a guy with a hoodie, and he'll pretend like he's looking at the menu, and that as soon as the cashier looks the other way, he'll grab the tip jar and run out. So I don't get upset about it, because I see myself in that. The kid that came and stole the tip jar, I was like him, man. Yeah, instead of sending him in prison, maybe somebody should go talk to him. You need to deter the crime, obviously. But at the same time, man, you got to give people a second chance. And here in California, we put a redemption value on soda cans, 2 cents or 5 cents. Human life should have some redemption values on it too.
If we're going to put people in prisons, the one thing we need to do is to return to a time where we did not just punitive imprisonment, but also did rehabilitative. We have totally lost any hope for rehabilitation.
San Quentin State Prison is California's oldest prison. It has the state's largest death row.
What if we converted death row to an honor yard?
California Governor Gavin Newsom proposed a $360 million plan to transform San Quentin State Prison into a rehabilitation facility.
For us, this is about real public safety. This is about keeping communities safe. This is about getting serious about addressing the issue of crime and violence in our state, but doing things differently.
San Quentin already has rehab programs. One teaches inmates coding skills.
We're actually learning how to code websites. And this is one example of a website that I built over the course of the last couple of weeks.
The man who murdered Sierra Harrison is also serving time at San Quentin. The victim's mother supports rehabilitation for her daughter's murderer.
If they don't have resources to take classes, to learn and grow and heal forward, what else are they going to do? Nobody ever got rehabilitated by playing cards all day.
95% of the job is getting them help after they're out. They need job support, they need family support. Many need mental health support.
Currently, nearly half of California's inmates recommit crimes. This approach aims to break that cycle by providing skills and opportunities. Mark Klaas doesn't buy it.
Perfect. I think some people can be rehabilitated. I don't think a sexually sadistic psychopath can be rehabilitated. Once somebody has slipped into violent crime, no, I don't think they can be rehabilitated, and I don't think there should be attempts to rehabilitate them. I think we should throw them away and lock up the key. I think violent people should be behind bars. We don't need that in our society.
Richard Allen Davis was paroled from San Quentin months before he kidnapped and killed Polly Klaas.
He was given a job that paid him $16.50 an hour in 1993 as a machinist that was trained in a rehab program, and 3 months later, my daughter was dead.
Governor Newsom formed a working group to determine which inmates would qualify for rehabilitation. Many on death row are already being moved to other prisons. Davis will not be eligible for rehabilitation.
Murder is really the unforgivable sin. People can do what they want. They can get involved in restorative justice if they want. That's fine. But listen, this guy upturned my life. He murdered my child who had promise, he had opportunity. I'm not going to forgive him. I'm going to wish him hell in eternity.
I'm here at Solano State Prison, and I actually paroled from here. So to be able to come back and to be able to drop off food for the Eid banquet to the guys that I was locked up with before, that's a huge honor for me, man.
Oh, man, I've been thinking about you all the time, man.
You know, some of you guys might know me. I was locked up for a total of 21 years. I was in high school when I got locked up. I fought a life sentence under the 3 strikes law. But what I want to speak about today is hope. If I hadn't gone to prison, I would have never been able to explore my full human potential. Once I understood the impact of my actions on other people's lives, it turned me into a completely different person. If Prop 36 had not passed, I'd still be in prison. I was not expected to get out anytime soon. It's my 10-year anniversary of freedom. Every May 28, I write a beautiful letter just being thankful for a second chance. This one's very special.
This is an email to me, David, and Anne. Wow, I can't believe it's been 10 years since I got out on this day in 2013. I can't think of any words profound enough or expansive enough to fully describe the totality of appreciation I feel for what you guys did. You have given me life. I valued every minute of my time and maximized it to the best of my ability. I owe my life to you with all my love. Sajjad Shakur.